Good morning. We are back from break. It is 10:08 a.m. and we are picking up with a sheriff, law enforcement. Nicole is there.
Yep, we'll just pass it right over to the sheriff's office.
Okay. Go ahead. We have Sheriff Derek Sanders here with us this morning, as well as Under Sheriff Dave Pearsall and Heidi Thompson, their financial chief. Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing us the time to propose some budgetary issues before you. We have a slideshow here that was created by Chief Thompson here. It goes over just some basic information. You know, this is for the law enforcement budget. Obviously, the Sheriff's Office is responsible for law enforcement services to our 150,000 unincorporated citizens, and then we are also responsible for all of the orders from the courts. So our civil division is also responsible for that. It also has some funds managed by the Sheriff's Office. Those are just, you can look through those numbers. I'll let you have those at a later date. We won't spend too much time on that. We also have our general fund budget laid out for you, which includes the 2022 actual, the 2023 budget amendments, and then the 2024 proposed FTEs, and then the 2025 for the next meeting. The next slide, we have the other funds. Again, I will let you guys go over kind of that stuff on your own. If you have any questions, that's more finance specific. So the opportunities and challenges of the Sheriff's Office, we are obviously in a staffing emergency. There's a little bit of a delay on that from my part because quite frankly, when I took over the office, there was a staffing emergency, but you want to remain optimistic as an elected official coming in. So I wanted to give it some time as we progressed, but the reality is that financial constraints have ultimately led to us to remain essentially static. We've hired 8 deputy sheriffs this year and we lost 8 deputy sheriffs. So we are in the exact same position as we were in January. Low wages, I wouldn't say low wages, but I would say, you know, not competitive wages. At the end of the day, we have our comparables within amongst other counties, but the reality is that we're losing a lot of our deputies, obviously, to city agencies. I was just notified yesterday that 2 deputies have applied with the city of Lacey, which will drop that number down to 10 deputies lost this year. One of the big ones in here is the obsolete IT systems and inefficiencies. We have camera issues in the jail, a completely obsolete system. We are still working with a report writing system that doesn't talk to any of the other agencies. We do have a consortium to replace that system. But the one that we're currently working with looks like it was built with the first computer system ever. It is extremely outdated. For the next one, we go into our budget priorities. For priority 1, we are asking to add 1 financial operations assistant. That is for Chief Thompson's bureau. Chief Thompson, the last time that we had an FTE added to this bureau was 2005. So despite the fact that the budget has doubled in that time, essentially, and we've had a significant increase in FTEs, our finance department is still lagging behind significantly. This is impactful because we hear, you know, the county's trying to get, you know, someone to assist with federal grant money and all these different things. Well, the money's not free. It requires, as everyone knows in this room, manpower to actually go through all the different procurement and maintaining of performance stuff when it comes to the grants. So we believe that that's our top priority, is getting another financial operation so that we can open up a little bit of more opportunity for us to receive more funding to alleviate our funding issues through grants and other opportunities. So Chief Thompson, do you have anything you want to add on that one?
Nope, I think you covered it
Okay.
really well. Thank you.
Priority 2 is to add 1 evidence technician position. With this, when I ran for office and after getting elected, I get talked to a lot about missing person cases. The Sheriff's Office currently does not have a detective assigned to missing persons. Basically, when you get selected to become a detective, people just inherit new cases as like the very bottom of their list, in addition to the active homicides, robberies, sex offenses, and all the things that they're assigned. The evidence tech position, we are one of the last agencies in this entire area that still has fully commissioned detectives collecting property. Those are very valuable positions. These are detectives who have a lot of training and experience, and we have them doing evidence collection and maintaining evidence rooms. My proposal would be to civilianize that position with our newly created evidence tech position, and that would free up a detective position. My plan for that position would then be to assign them full-time to missing persons complaints, so that we can give that section of the community that really wants answers an opportunity to have those answers met through an actual dedicated position. So the evidence technician is big. One of the big themes that you'll see throughout this budget proposal is that we are trying to civilianize areas in our department because civilian positions are much easier to hire and train as opposed to using commission positions for jobs that civilians can do. Everywhere in the state, there is a significant lack of commissioned police officers. And so as that trend continues, we need to find ways that we can civilianize portions of our department to get the work done and alleviate the workload on our commissioned staff. So that is the evidence technician position. On the next slide, request number 3 is to create 2 new deputy cadet positions. I started my career off with Lacey Police Department as a cadet. One of the biggest issues I think we have to our ongoing police officer shortage in this state and probably in this country is that we don't have a way to effectively recruit people out of high school. Essentially, when we are sending our recruits to the high school, we're telling them, hey, you're 18 now, come back in 3 years and work for us after you've spent all that money on a degree. It's a really ineffective way to recruit. The cadet position is a little more unique. It comes at a much cheaper price tag than a fully commissioned deputy. And essentially the duties of the cadet are to assist with traffic collisions by blocking roadways and doing things like that. They handle the non-emergency calls such as parking violations. They can assist with civil complaints and public service calls. They can log evidence. So instead of a commissioned person staying late and working the overtime, we can have a cadet take the chain of evidence and log it in. They also serve an extremely important function by transporting individuals who are already in custody to the jail, either from the point of arrest or from jail to jail. If you can imagine at nighttime, if we have 7 deputies working for 150,000 people and we need to transport someone from Thurston County Jail to Nisqually Jail for at least an hour, you now have 6 deputies working. And if someone makes another in custody arrest, you now have 5 deputies working. It's very quick. It goes quickly at nighttime where all of a sudden you've got 4 deputies available for the 911 calls that are coming in because transports they take so long to get done. So the cadet is an unarmed civilian position. They still drive a patrol vehicle that will be clearly marked as a cadet. They are given tasers and they do all of those different transport functions for the office. They also do hospital sits. So when individuals are, they get arrested and they say they've swallowed heroin or fentanyl, the cadet can take over that transport instead of the hospital to free up those commissioned positions. So once again, the trend, we're trying to find civilian positions to alleviate the workload and make sure that we know that 7 deputies on at one time is not enough. Let's keep it at 7 though, not dip down into the 5, 6, and 4 range. So that is for the deputy cadet. For priority 4, this one is for the animal protection deputies. There's been a lot of contention and issues around animal services over the years. We know that the county pays animal services nearly $1 million for the services that they provide. I've met with animal services. I have confirmed personally that they do not provide the level of service that the sheriff's office needs to adequately address the issues in our community. Case in point, yesterday and still going on today, we have a horse running around Tenino that no one can get a hold of. Animal services will not respond. They don't handle livestock. We don't have the means and ability. So we are essentially at this point waiting for either a civilian or the state government to intervene and get this horse that is still running around 507. As you know, that was also an issue earlier where a motorcyclist hit a horse that was, and it ultimately ended in a fatality. So we do not have the ability to handle these calls. And it is our request that we get, however the funding comes, whether it's from the animal services budget or new funding, to have our own in-house animal control, essentially, that we have basically control over to determine what services we're actually going to provide. And it is our understanding that for the cost associated here of the 484,400, that we can provide complete and total service within unincorporated Thurston County, including livestock, dogs, all of those different things. And so it's continuing to be an issue, and as we continue to look at what services we have to cut due to our staffing emergency, with the money that's currently allocated to animal services, one of our proposed cuts will be that we don't respond to any animal complaints whatsoever. That for $1 million, animal services should provide all of those services, and if they don't, then that is an issue between the county commissioners and animal services as far as why livestock and 75% of the issues we actually have in unincorporated county aren't covered with that $1 million. So that's kind of my proposal for the animal protection deputy stuff, is that we receive the funding for that and we provide a complete and total in-house service for that. Moving on to the next, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
On your animal complaints that are not large animals, how are you going to handle, I don't know, rabid dogs or whatever you end up with in the smaller animals? Are you gonna be able to use the animal control facility? Are you gonna have your own pound situation?
That's an ongoing conversation I think that needs to occur. As of right now, the proposed, after speaking with Sarah, and I don't know what the contracts say and all that stuff, but she essentially stated that, you know, half of the funding that the sheriff's office or that the county gives to animal services is for infrastructure. So to me, this is the other half that goes into field services. I would argue that if the county continued to pay half and half, that we would have access to their facility, that we'd be able to drop those animals off and do those things. However, looking forward into the future, if there were a time where, for instance, the county got its own building, the sheriff's office got its own building, I would recommend building some sort of small facility to house animals, so everything is in-house within our own office. Pierce County did this same model back in, I think, 2004-ish is what we were told. They had a lot of pushback about moving animal services within the sheriff's office. They started with 2, I believe now they have 19 of them, because the program's been so successful. And what they found is that by having animal services not only in the same building as the sheriff's office, under the sheriff's purview, the relationship between the deputies and animal services became extremely strong. They knew who to call and who could solve things, who came out for after-hours stuff. When puppies were rescued from the puppy mill, they would let the puppies run around the agency and deputies would adopt them. So they just said that overall it improved the response model and the cohesion between animal services and the sheriff's office significantly. So for us, the animal protection thing, these positions, which would start it to potentially expand in the future, would handle all animal complaints within the county. They would do the barking dog, the livestock, the horses, the cows, all of that stuff. That would be the proposal.
Follow-up question. Animal services does not handle livestock, I mean, just because of the infrastructure facility where they're in. They only handle house pets is basically it. So here you're talking about livestock too. How do you plan to address that, right? If you're able to catch a running horse around it, like, then what's the next step for that? Like,
My plan for that would be to find a ranch in every district that would be willing to contract with the county for short-term storage of the animals. And that is something that we don't currently have. I wouldn't imagine those contracts would be super expensive. Most of the ranchers in our area have a soft spot for animals. I've talked to a number of them that said they would have no issue. Some of them would volunteer. And essentially the contract would cover the short-term care and the feeding of the animals until it gets rehoused or until we find the owner. This would also probably include at some point the one-time purchase of, for instance, a horse trailer. We would equip these animal protection deputies with trucks so that they could actually go get a horse trailer, load a horse up, and take it somewhere where it's safe. That is something the county does not currently have. So despite the fact we deal with these issues constantly, you know, as a patrol deputy, I received no training. We still don't have any training on any animal stuff. And we drive around, we honk our horn until the cow finds its way into the woods. That's the current animal livestock response in the county. If the state is available to send someone else, like Fish and Wildlife, they'll assist, but that's a hit or miss.
They don't do anything with horses and cows, do
No.
they?
No, we usually just continue to call around. Typically, the way that these instances are solved is a private civilian finds themselves a horse trailer and goes and loads the horse up. And then they put it on Facebook and say, whose horse is this? That's the current livestock animal process in this county. It is civilian volunteer based, unless someone hits or kills the animal.
And there's no official organization or volunteer group that, you know, that does this. What did Mary Ware used to do?
Got hooved animal rescue and things like that, but they're also running out of space. So with them, it's hit or miss. We call them often, hey, can you handle this? Hey, can you take this? But most of the time they're saying that they're full.
Going back to so I know you said a lot of the calls are bigger animals, but I heard mostly dogs. I mean, when I was the complaints get routed to the commissioner generally that serves on JASCOM, and for my first 2 years, it was a lot of dogs.
Yes.
And my sense was, in talking to Sheriff Snaza, was that, you know, that I mean, barking dog is a pretty mundane thing for your trained, patrol deputies that are dealing with very, very serious matters that have to be taken off the road and messing around with. These two animal protection deputies, I mean, that's not gonna necessarily cover 24 hours of coverage for every call, and I guess, do your employees wanna have this responsibility taken on in-house? I mean, is that, and I guess a secondary question that I had was about if you had any data, because I know when we were debating whether or not to go back up to full service from Jazzcom, it was like, okay, you guys are getting so many calls, and having to respond. And our rationale for going ahead and restoring that full funding was, let's reduce the number of calls that your officers have to respond to. Sounds like you're still having to respond to a lot, but I mean, do you have like numbers at all to say, okay, well, we were responding to, 200 a year, and now it's still 175, and that's not a good enough return on the investment of the million,
Yeah.
the extra, however much was 400,000 or something we kicked back. It was like 663, and now it's like 1.1, something like that. So I mean, or even if it's just anecdotal, can you give us a sense of like, did the call load drop at all for you guys when we restored that service for barking dogs and nuisance dogs and rabid dogs and all that? Or has it just been a complete bust in terms of reducing the load, if that makes sense?
We have not seen any change, I would say that. I mean, Animal Services clearly demonstrated that they respond to a certain number of calls, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But they don't have 24-hour service. So that was part of the conversation, I think, that occurred with Ramiro at that last conversation, was that Animal Services was essentially like, listen, we have staffing issues like you guys do. And Ramiro was like, well, hang on, you guys aren't county employees who have staffing issues. You guys signed a contract that we paid you money for. So then they were like, well, we're giving you guys refunds. Part of the issue with that, I guess Animal Services is gonna be giving refunds, but that's gonna go into the general fund. That doesn't account for the deputies that are handling these barking dogs during the nighttime. And so I guess that's part of my concern with all of this, is that when I was a deputy, up until I got elected, I would say, someone would call in, cause it goes through 911, there's a barking dog who won't shut up. Okay, call Animal Services. I called 7 times, it goes to a phone tree, there's no one available. Okay, it's now the sheriff's office problem.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, was the big thing, is that the numbers they're providing are during normal business hours. So, 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday kind of thing. It doesn't account for all the calls that deputies are handling. Now, I don't have any hard data because I just hired a crime analyst. So they're working on a number of different things, but anecdotally, they don't respond to livestock. They can only do partial criminal investigations. So at some point, they're basically just like, yeah, a cat got hurt, but here it is now, you handle it. And I'm able to partially commission these individuals to do the investigation all the way to the point of arrest. At that point, they would take a deputy with them to make an arrest for animal cruelty and things like that, so.
And you, Commissioner Edwards, are you the rep right now?
Yeah.
At some point, I'd like to, it's probably not the time, but I'd like to hear your perspective, what the discussions have been at Jazzcom, and it's been a few years since I've been on that board.
Yeah,
Things have not improved.
Sheriff Snaza was able to provide us with those hard numbers, and I think that's when we came down to it, right? We had a discussion with him on, do we do this or not? Because we knew it was gonna be a huge impact to the budget, and there was a lot of discussion. I was the JASCON rep at the time, and I had several conversations with Sheriff Snaza about like, do we do this or not? Is this something that your office supports or not? If not, then we need to look at other avenues. And there were conversations between, JASCOM and Sheriff Snaza. And then at that time, right, it was like, he provided the numbers of the calls he was getting, specifically related. We were handling the dangerous dog designations, and we were getting quite a few through as well. We saw a reduction in those numbers for sure. I mean, I remember the first year I was here, we had, I don't even remember how many, but it was starting to become kind of like a frequent occurrence where we were having these dangerous dog designations coming from the board, and we saw a reduction in those. I know the first year after we signed the contract, there were some issues. And again, there was a meeting between, I think it was Under Sheriff Brady at the time, and JASCOM to kind of discuss the issues and see how we could get the same level. So, you know, and then we got an email back from Under Sheriff Brady saying it's improved, right? This is how it's improved. You know, this is, and again, he provided us that feedback and data to kind of back that up. And so, you know, I kind of agree with Commissioner Menser in terms of it would be good to see those numbers because they have been provided to us in the past. And for us to, you know, be able, when we're discussing and deliberating that, it would be good just to have that information on like, okay, since, you know, this time or this year, you know, the calls have gone right back up. I know during COVID, when everyone was home, those calls went right up because everyone was home and everyone, where they didn't hear their neighbor's dog before, now they were hearing their neighbor's dog while they were trying to be in a meeting. And it was just quite a bit. And so it would be good to see that data, right? To see like, are we going back those trends up, right? Like, is it going back up again where, you know, those 8 hours that they're providing, even though we are paying for that 24-hour service, is just not covering the gap and it's, you know, offloading way more into your office. Or even during those 8 hours where they're in operation, calls are still getting directed to the sheriff's office. That would, you know, it's just good to see because we need to know exactly, right? Because in the end, we need to be able to show, that's the first thing Animal Services is going to ask us for. It's like, well, we are responding for these calls, like, you know, what other calls are they getting? And if we don't have that information, it's hard for us to be like, well, they're actually responding to this many calls after hours, or even while you're in service, they're still responding to these number of calls because of, you know, livestock, horses, or whatever other issue comes up. So I guess not now, but in the future, it's just good as we enter deliberations. I kind of support that idea, just to see at least some.
I mean, this is like, it was one thing to just write a check for the advanced service. This is like a huge change in standing up this huge program. We're not going back. Like, I gotta be certain that this is gonna work. And, cause we can't just do this and then go, oh, that didn't work too good. Let's just, like, we can't do that if we're gonna build you a shelter and, you know,
Sure.
hire the staffing and all that. I mean, this is a massive undertaking. It might be the right thing, but
I think the biggest challenge with the data is that there's no single database to actually pull anything from. So the concern I have is that I can provide you numbers right now. I just can't tell you whether the numbers are actually accurate because of the process. The current system we have, in my opinion, is broken. Animal Services is not part of dispatch. They're not part of any kind of law. They're not attached to us in any way. They're a third-party vendor. And so what ends up happening is people call, they don't call Animal Services when they have an animal problem. They call 911. And our response is call Animal Services. Well, we don't know what happens in between now and then. So I can provide anyone in this room the sheer number of Animal Services calls that come, or the animal
To hit
complaints that come
911.
in. And the tricky part though is like, we don't have different type codes for livestock and a barking dog. It's just animal complaint. And then some of them are noise complaints. And so I think that's where it becomes difficult to keep track of the data, is we would have to assign someone full-time to sit there and sift through each individual call and say, this one was a noise complaint, but it wasn't music, it was a barking dog, and Animal Services wasn't available. This one was an animal complaint, it was livestock, a horse looks beaten and battered. Animal Services doesn't handle this one. It would take the actual sifting through. There's no easy way to sort through that, which leads me to believe that the previous administration probably handed you guys very generic data, which said, here's all the animal complaints, here they are. I doubt anyone went through and sifted through and looked at every single noise complaint to determine whether, because there's half of them are probably animals and dogs and things like that. The other half are music. And then there's gonna be some animal complaints that meet a criteria and some that don't. I think that's gonna be the biggest challenge, is just the manpower to actually get you accurate data. Otherwise, just understand the data will be extremely generic, because that's the issue. Animal Services, my proposal with this is that we would buy radios for these individuals. They would have call signs. While they're dealing with animals, in the building or whatever, they would also be listening for any calls that came in unincorporated county and responding immediately. What we have right now is people they call 911, and then we tell them, we don't handle that, that's Animal Services problem. And that's the end of our contact with that. We don't know if they follow up with animal services. I assume that some of them are, because animal services is showing us the data that says they respond to this stuff. But I'll also argue that the mundane barking dog complaint is quite frankly one of the least of my concerns. We'll handle it, yes, absolutely, that would be part of these two individuals, but at nighttime, just like animal services currently does when we don't have coverage, that's something that the animal protection deputy would follow up with most likely the next day. We're not gonna call someone out for that. And our deputies aren't equipped to deal with those things either, because it's not within their training or wheelhouse.
I guess to follow up on what the sheriff just said, and there's another sad scenario developing, I guess, is crime and perception of crime is escalating, and citizens don't feel safe, and they're gonna be getting watchdogs and different things that, because I've seen this happen before, and then they get the dogs that are barking, and they're gone to work or whatever, and the dogs are out there barking, so that's just, we're gonna have escalating calls, I think, probably because of what we're dealing with from a societal issue. But you mentioned rebates from animal control. Robin, what are we getting for rebates?
Ooh.
'Cause I think we need to equate that into our decision here.
Let me see if I.
This was something that was brought up in my meeting with Sarah. She said, well, we weren't able to provide the 24-hour service, so we are getting money
Right.
back.
So we need to know,
Just
I
because
guess,
they
what-
couldn't hire enough people that,
That's right. They have vacancies and so they are rebating money to the jurisdictions that.
And
may-
then are they actually going out on anything in the UGA areas of the municipalities and providing a service? And kind of drawing the line there, and then they don't go to rural America, or do you know what's going on there?
For the service that animal service provides, they're providing that countywide. The entire county is getting barking dog and, those types of complaints. But again, because they haven't been able to provide a 24-hour service, we had to buy dog catcher poles for our deputies. There's no training on that. We just gave it to them in an attempt to not have to shoot people's dogs. I mean, that is the current level of what we're dealing with in the county of like, there's nothing really structured, and because they're a third-party vendor, it's a really weird system to have.
when you were sheriff, Commissioner, was there jazz com or
No,
did you guys have to handle that?
We did what we could do. We did a lot more shooting.
Was there a shelter though? Was there a shelter?
Yeah, there was a shelter, yeah. But we didn't haul dogs to the shelter. If we couldn't handle the dog, it usually didn't survive. That was the way it went.
So. We can continue on. Again, this is probably gonna be a longer term. I can totally get you guys the numbers, just understand that I can't guarantee the accuracy of the numbers because it would take a long time. And that's one of the issues we have with our entire system, right, is this part of the benefit of having two internal people is that they'll not only be able to do their own criminal investigations for things that deputies are currently doing. So all our deputies are doing the animal cruelty cases, not animal services. So we deal with that. But then they'll also be in our system, they'll be writing police reports. So we'll be able to get you guys data that's all internal as opposed to, we're comparing two different things at one time. We're saying, yeah, here's the number of calls that they handled and here's how many went through 911.
Yeah, I mean, the relevant number it's not just who, like, before we had full service, it was like, someone calls 911 and they could be told, okay, that's, cause the animal service still handled stuff that where like a person's safety was at issue or whatever, there was some level of service in the county. Okay, that went there, but then how many didn't go there, where it was like, you can't send them to animal service, like, you gotta call the sheriff. That number versus now, there shouldn't be very many people, I would think, it would be call animal services. Now, some of those won't be able to get through animal services and they'll call you anyway, or animal service says, we're not doing that, that's a horse, and then they're calling you anyway. So it's comparing those two numbers. I don't know if that's possible, but that's, like how much of a diminution of the calls that after they went through 911 and animal services flopped back on you.
Yeah.
Before and after the change. I don't know, but that's. I
Yeah,
mean,
we can try and work on
if
as
it's
accurate a number as we can with the,
yeah, if it's something that's there. I'd
yeah,
like to
well,
see
we
it.
have a crime
If not,
analyst
it's
now,
not.
so.
And I can't tell you the amount of times that we've had loose menacing dog complaints and, harassing dogs that are, to people. So we get the call, call animal services, well, we're not coming out unless you capture the dog. So either deputy has to go capture it, or the homeowner who's complaining and afraid of this dog has to capture it and tie it up someplace, or animal control won't even roll their wheels to head out to handle it.
Which is why we gave
That's-
them dog pole catchers.
And that's not consistent with our contract, right?
No, we're not getting any service from the contract. That's why I'm wondering about this rebate.
I'm
How,
looking it up.
how much more we gave them another 500,000 or whatever it was
Something like
for a service, but it sounds like we didn't get much, so I'm hoping the rebate is at least coming back to us, you know, so for what we
It's
didn't get,
a couple 100,000. It's significant.
but,
Okay,
but it's not significant.
Let's move on. We have to move on.
If we're
Okay.
paying 300,000 and not getting a service too.
That's kind of my whole point.
Let's-
So, moving on to, priority number 5, which is the next slide. This is to add 1 bureau staff assistant. And I'll let Dave talk a little bit on this one, cause this was for, the support services bureau.
Yeah, we're looking at adding a bureau staff assistant. Right now, the support services bureau does not have one. The jail and down in corrections, they have a person. The sheriff has, Carrie, his executive aide, and other people. Down in patrol at the FOB, Chief Mancias has one, but, Chief Carter and myself, we don't have one. And so we're looking at somebody that we could share, that the two of us could share this person that could handle some of these duties that we just can't get to and, you know, take care of the things that would be normally given to a bureau staff assistant, so. We have, Chief Carter and myself don't have that, so we're just looking to add one that can be shared between the two of us.
For number 6, it's funding for contracted mental health professional services. We currently have a contract with Oriana. You guys probably seen her around. She does a lot of our peer support. And she's also a civilian crisis negotiator on our negotiation team. She provides an extremely valuable service to our deputies. She is available. She's got an office right down here by the courthouse. But she is basically, she's the closest thing we have to a contracted psychologist for deputies to go see and talk to. We've had a big push in the profession over the last maybe decade about the mental health and wellness of our employees. I think everyone has seen kind of the harrowing statistics for police officers. They tend to retire and die just because of the mental health and all the wear and tear on the body and everything like that. Oriana's been a huge help to me personally. I routinely take her on ride-alongs. That's one of the services that she'll do. She'll ride along with the deputy and all those kinds of things. She's a contracted, we talked about whether or not we were gonna ask for an FTE and try to hire her or do a contracted service. I think just when you talk about keeping that person separate from the department so that employees feel comfortable talking to them was the route that we wanted to go with that. And it's more of a part-time service anyways. And we're trying to get her a little more involved in the jail as well, just as someone to chat with, because all of us see traumatic things in this job, and she does a really good job. I mean, you know, when deputies get into shootings or they go and they investigate an infant death, she's usually reaching out to them personally, and asking if they need anything. And so she's also part of the Conflict Resolution Center. So she's got a lot of training. In fact, she just hosted a training that was aimed at giving psychologists around the region law enforcement specific training, so that people around this entire region have access to psychologists that have that specialized training to deal with some of the ways that police officers deal with trauma. So that was mental health professional services funding to retain her services.
So, if I can add a
Yeah.
little bit on there. It's always, as the sheriff kind of alluded to, it's been taboo for law enforcement, fire, anybody to ever say they've got an issue that they need to talk to somebody. But there's been a lot of training, a lot of pushing in the last many years to get people to where they're comfortable saying, hey, I got an issue, I need to talk to somebody. And we're able to save that employee, whereas years ago it would have been, hey, he's going to a shrink, we need to do something and help him find the door out. So it's just, I just met Oriana when I came on board in January. And the amount that I see her doing with our agency is just unbelievable. And I know that I don't have the exact numbers, but I heard just recently, but it's over 20 deputies have gone and sought her services just this year. So it's a tremendous thing to have for the health of our people.
Does that work in conjunction with the chaplain program?
It doesn't, it's a little different, but the chaplains can do the same thing. And that's why we're big with using the chaplains as well.
Yeah, the chaplains are a little more reactive, I think. They're a lot of the times going to 911 calls, right, for death investigations and stuff. Oriana is like not really, she's not really as focused on community stuff, whereas the chaplains are. She's more focused, I think, internally. Oriana does a lot more stuff internal, with our employees, whereas the chaplain is kind of a 50-50. They do work in the community and they also can help the deputies, but most of the time, you know, when we're using chaplains, it's because I'm in a death investigation. It's kind of awkward. I mean, it's really sad stuff. And I'm like, someone else should be here too. I have to take photos and like do intrusive things. And the chaplain's there more to like hang out with them even after we leave and that kind of thing, so.
No, I'm just speaking. You've got your
Yeah, we
job
have
to do.
a checklist,
You gotta be
unfortunately,
clinical and
for-
kind of non-emotional, and that's not always what the
Yeah.
person on the scene needs.
It's gonna be really weird if the deputy starts crying too. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, it's a, right, I mean, it's a tough scenario where the chaplain gets get a little more intimate with the people there. So, but Oriana is more focused on the work inside. And like we talked about, a lot of deputies have gone and seen them. I've had Oriana in my car. I have some stress to lay off on her as well. But I would argue, just from what I know, at least 1 or 2 deputies are still here this year, because of her services. That's 2 FTEs that we're not filling, just based on what she's doing, so. That was number 6, for number 7, and just to also clarify with, you know, the coroner, these were all proposed prior to the 8%, so, you know, I know everyone's probably saying that, but I wanted to reiterate that. For number 7, it's to add a legal assistant, back into the fold. Obviously, we converted one of those positions earlier this year. That was the purpose of this. Now we're trying to basically just move all of our services to IT. However, we will still have the need for this legal assistant, because as we move forward, the jail is now open. We anticipate more warrants being issued. That was the position that we essentially stole from ourselves. So as the warrants start coming out again for people who are missing court dates and all that kind of stuff, we anticipate the workload returning. And there's just never any shortage in our support staff. There's always stuff that ends up coming up. So having the legal assistant, this one that we removed was kind of our floater legal assistant. So as different things came up across the county, new programs started up, new data that we needed to track, I think it'll be important to restore that position. And then number 8 was to add in, and again, we're getting towards the end of things, but was to add in another financial operations assistant. With our first priority, I think that restores us to where we needed to be yesterday. With this one, I know Heidi has talked a little bit about doing a grant specialist kind of thing. Someone on the county, on the sheriff's office side, who is specifically focused on finding us more of that government money and keeping track of that. And also just the increase in payroll and all those different issues that we're having. TC Connect, I know, is going to be a huge jump for us. And so having those resources available in the finance department.
And if I may, I understand there's an email that came out, I haven't read it yet, obviously it just came out about it going to Munis, the upgrade to Munis, I think it was that we guys were talking about.
I haven't seen it
Nine
yet.
57 AM it got sent out.
Yeah, so I haven't looked at it yet, but, you know, I think that probably maybe eliminates this need. You know, I have some concerns with the way TC Connect is configured, and I don't know where we're going with it, but right now, my priority personally, is the one FOA. You know, quite frankly, there's a push for more grants, more federal grants, as we talked about before. There's a huge amount of compliance reporting on that, right now. Just let you know where the Bureau is. Several years ago, we had an internal audit. I can't implement those recommendations from that because I don't have the capacity to do it, you know. And that increases our risk of fraud, waste, and abuse. It's just, that's where we are right now. So, it's unfortunate, but not much I can do about that. But like I said, if, you know, if TC Connect is off the table, and Munis is, it's not, okay, well, then that's still back on the table. And I was gonna say that this is not as a high priority if this is not.
Yeah, the Munis upgrade, the Munis email that just went out is just the upgrade to the next version.
Okay,
Yeah.
then never mind.
I mean, there's
Disregard.
gonna be stuff changing with the versions, but we're still moving forward with TC Connect.
Okay, again, and I haven't looked at the email yet, but then this,
I think this one was more tied to the TC Connect and
Yep.
just the additional workload that TC Connect would bring for the sheriff's office and needing that.
We know that it will cause workload at first as we learn something new. There's always additional workload with new things,
But it's the data entry part that we're struggling with, is
but we
how it's,
don't know that that's really gonna be
if,
an
if a
ongoing issue.
yeah, if a reconfig changes that way it's entered.
That's right.
Great, that would be perfect, but.
Then we also were asked by the county to also incorporate the basically the proposed FTEs in the event that the public safety tax were to pass. So in here, we have the three, I think it's 3 phases of the FTEs, which is basically the FTEs just split into three sections. And so the first phase was the first 11, then 12, then 13 FTEs. And that included the patrol deputy positions that we're looking to add.
I think we're gonna need a separate session for, I mean, this, because for me, like, 11 FTEs doesn't really help address like what FTEs, right? Like, that's, what FTEs are we going to be approving if we approve this phase plan approach? Like, there needs to be a breakdown of that information for the full board. And then in these phased approaches, one of the main items that we've discussed has been the infrastructure. Just how phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 is allowed here doesn't allow for that ability for infrastructure on that amount. And so kind of like, there needs to be a little bit more discussion, I feel, like on kind of,
Yeah, this is a very, very broad overview because it's all theoretical anyway. I mean,
Yes, it
you know,
is.
and that
I
was
mean,
kind of
it's
I didn't
counting
wanna spend a
our
whole lot of
chickens before they
time.
hatch.
Yeah, I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time getting into the weeds of this because ultimately and I think Heidi also has some documentation to supplement this. This was to fit on the PowerPoint.
And even phase 1, you know, we can't do that January 1st, right? Cause the money's not gonna be there, but this is a discussion point to start with, to have that conversation.
So we would put, probably not, I mean, we would be able to like put provisos, like, or, I mean, we'll know about the vote, but I mean, in terms of like starting dates for new positions, that would be somewhere in 2024. We can
Right.
structure things that way to
You
accommodate that.
absolutely can do that, and we need to ensure, and this is part of what we were showing you yesterday with an initial financial plan for these funds, is you can't spend this much in the first year. At best, we're looking at what, around 700,000-800,000 in the first year. And the amounts in this budget are significantly more than that, both in the first year and ongoing. So we're gonna have to figure out what you really wanna spend in the first year.
And that's part of why they should group them in these phases, so it'd be easy to pick something up and move it a little bit farther down the road.
Yeah, there's probably gonna be more than 3 phases, I'm just guessing. But again, this was so theoretical that we didn't wanna spend a whole lot of our time presenting on, you know, and I don't know if it's even appropriate to present on this stuff right now
We,
because.
we have to present it now because the board has to make budget decisions before the vote.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for publication of the budget and all
Exactly,
that.
for
And it's-
publication of the budget and to hold the public hearings timely, they have to make decisions now.
Yeah, and so that's why it's, of course, when we were making these decisions, we know it's provisional based upon what the results in November are, but since they have to
I
be
understand now.
publicized by December, yeah.
I understand now, okay.
Okay, I know we're over time, but I do have one question for you, Sheriff. Knowing that when we made these decisions of like submitting requests, right, we didn't know about those budgetary cuts. And just being how the budget situation is right now, where there is 8% cuts across. Out of these positions that you've listed out, you've listed them in those priorities, of course. Is there a very specific need in one of these where your office would suffer detrimental, something if it wasn't approved?
My argument would probably be for the financial operations assistant. It's just the continued workload of the financial operations assistant and the liability that comes with all of those issues, not to mention, we're losing out on money because we can't apply for grants because we don't have the manpower to actually maintain those grants and track performance measures and things like that. So I would argue that our priority one is probably the most detrimental issue, and need. And again, the rest of those things are part of, you know, the natural growth of the departments. But the two biggest things I'll say that I hear from the public, I mean, I understand these needs from the internal side of things. The two biggest things I hear from the public are, why are we doing nothing about animal issues? And why are no and missing person investigations being conducted? So that's why. Very promptly after that, you have an evidence tech meant to free up our detectives and the animal protection stuff, which is, I think, a different kind of budgetary question there. But those would be, I think, the top three things in this budget request that we're looking at when it comes to sheriff's office priorities about what we know we need and community demands.
Anything new on rebate?
I'm not finding the document that I think I have. I'll get back to you on that, but it's at least 200,000, I think it's more.
Okay. 10:53, let's go ahead and take a break, and then we will be back with the sheriff on the correction side of things. Okay, we are back from break. It is 11:01 and we are picking up with Sheriff Corrections. And after, we will be heading back to the last bit of the presentation for law enforcement. Anything you need to add, Nicole?
No, thank you,
Okay,
Commissioner.
so I'll pass it straight back to Sheriff Sanders to do his presentation for Sheriff's Office Corrections.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, obviously on slide 2 here, the sheriff's office manages the county jail. The county jail is responsible by statute for all felony, bookings in the county. So the cities have no other option. They must book at the county jail. As you guys already know, we're responsible for all the medical and everything that occurs in the county jail. And then the county jail is also responsible for misdemeanor crimes that our county deputies, decide to book on. And the jail is now, as of August 1st, fully open with no restrictions. Moving on to the next slide, we have some different funds that are managed by the sheriff's office. We have the prisoner concession fund, which Heidi has very clearly outlined for you. We then on the next slide have the general funds and the expenditures and amendments from 2022, 23, 24, and 25. So you guys should all have copies of that you can look through. For the other funds budget, it goes into some of the different FTEs and expenditures for the other funds that we manage. And it covers different FTEs and personnel and then other costs associated with that. Again, I will let you review that on your own time since we are on a limited basis here. So the opportunities and challenges is the same thing as the correction or the law enforcement side that we talked about earlier. Maybe the biggest thing right now, and it is quite frankly, the biggest headache at the jail is the camera system. The camera system is defunct. We have been replacing the camera systems. I mean, it sounds like there is some funding attached to that, but now it's starting to become a question. I think I got notified late last night that there may be an issue with that, so we're trying to sort through that. But
Talk about the importance of cameras in the jail.
yeah,
Robin.
yeah, well,
Behind us,
We
right?
all know that
And
let me
kinda
just say, we all know that there's importance to cameras in the jail. What
yeah.
we're trying to figure out is there any option between the failed system you have and the quite expensive system that you'd like to have? Is there anything that meets there, that gets 85% of what you need at 15% of the cost or whatever? You understand the point?
Yeah, which is what we're currently doing, which is we're piecemealing everything together.
Yeah.
But piecemealing everything together leads to failure over time. I mean, and I think that's been the greater conversation amongst everything is how do we get everyone on one system? And that's been, I think, consistent amongst the county in general with
Yes.
not just cameras, but report writing systems and whatever else it is, right? I think we're all trying to get to databases that talk to each other and work with each other. And the issue with the piecemealing, and it's a headache that I don't even quite understand yet, but the technicians and everyone working on it are just like, we are putting Band-Aids over this thing and the Band-Aids are rotting and falling off and we're putting a new Band-Aid on it all the time. So the alternative is to continue moving forward as we go, which is limited camera availability and problems that continue to come up. But I mean, even just going in and watching the corrections techs work on the software that they currently use to open and close the doors in the jail, touching buttons that don't work. It's a touch screen. Touching buttons, they don't work. It is a system that unfortunately needs a major overhaul. Does it work? Yes. Has there been also complete failures within the jail? Also, yes. It is kind of a problem if you can't open the Sally Port door because the touch screen isn't working, or you can't open up the door that allows the backup deputies to get into a dorm for a fight because the touch screen isn't responding, and you know the buttons here and they have to kind of touch over here. I mean, that's what we're working with. It works, but the corrections techs are good at their job and they're like, the button's here to hit it, but if you hit it over here, that's how you actually get it to hit the button. I mean, it's just it's kind of a mess all around. And frankly, I am not the subject matter expert on it. I have observed it, I've seen it firsthand, but I can't come before you as the expert. All I know is that it's something that is not new to the county. It's been in the works for quite some time to fix that stuff. But you know, the other thing we've been doing is the options building. Because of the staffing issues in COVID, we shut options down temporarily. The only reason my jail is not in a complete red is that I think it's 12 or 13 bodies that were staffing options we brought back into the main section of the jail. So even though we have 30 vacancies, Now you're really at 18 vacancies, and then we shut down EHM because we had very few inmates on electronic home monitoring, which freed up, I think, another 2 or 4 deputies. So those are the only things that haven't completely destroyed our budget over here when it comes to massive amounts of overtime.
Can you talk about EHM? You know, when I met with both district court and, I don't remember if it was Superior Court as well, it might be, but they, or it was you who spoke with Superior Court, I believe, and you reported on that, and that's why but there was, trying to find of the word, frustration or questions is a better way to phrase it. Questions about, you know, the EHM system being shut off and why it happened. And so I know me and you spoke about that and kind of your decision behind that, right? And of course, staffing is one of the reasons, but there were other reasons as well, and I just kind of wanted you to touch on that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not the subject matter expert on this, but what was explained to me by Chief Davis is that our private EHM had, I believe, 4 deputies working on it. And what we do at the county is we provide 24-hour EHM services. So if a violation occurs at 2 a.m, they get a notification and immediately it goes through that process of, you know, the accountability, the violation of pretrial and things like that. The issue that we were having is over the last few years, we've seen our county-run EHM fall off the map. And I think that this was before I got here, but I think there were some conversations trying to figure out why.
What do you mean fall off the map?
Our numbers, the amount of people who are actually enrolled in county-provided EHM. And when you're talking about 4 FTEs, that's not a cheap program to run. And there is a billing structure associated to EHM, and they scale it. So with our EHM services, we scale it based on how much the person can afford.
So, I'm sorry, is that because the courts weren't ordering it, or the prosecutors weren't
They didn't
supporting the
know.
recommendation for it, or people couldn't afford it? I mean, what was the driver for that dropping off the map?
The courts were allowing people to go to a private company to have their electronic home monitoring conducted. And apparently that's a less restrictive, they don't have the 24-hour service, so these defendants know, well, that's a lot easier if I go with these guys. And so that's what the courts were ordering, okay, you can do either one, here you go. So they're going to this rather than us, and so ours was just not being used.
Yeah, my understanding is that because the private EHM companies operate under banker hours, that, you know, Monday through Friday after normal business hours and on the weekends, there's no monitoring occurring. They basically come back on Monday morning and they can check and see what the person did. Oh, now there's a violation.
I can tell you as a criminal defense lawyer, as a practitioner, and and it had nothing to do with any of that. It was basically that, when your client gets a chance to go out on EHM, they want to be out yesterday. And I could get the private companies, you could get them out there in like a few hours. And
Yeah.
to go through you guys, it was like a couple of days of, you know, get an appointment. It might be a week before they got out. That was not acceptable. So they just wanted to be, it didn't matter. It could have been done twice as restrictive. But if they could get out yesterday, that's what they wanted. And so that's what I'd always
Yeah.
make the request to the judge. Can my client use a private company, because I could get them out sometimes the same day.
Certainly, and that could be a factor.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think there's a number of things that came in, but what it came down to is that we saw all of our numbers going to private EHM. So maybe it was because they were quicker.
And just to tag on to that and kind of make a bigger picture of this, so less people on EHM, less revenue. So we have a budget request to reduce our revenue allotment because of this, that more folks are not on EHM, we're not doing that business, if you will.
Why does it take so long for the county to, the timing aspect of it, like why is it, you know, for us, like a week and then for private less time? Like what is the background that, or the work that has to go?
I didn't feel that these guys were slow. I don't want to imply that, but like they're like they want business. This is their profit.
I
Like
think it's a
they're
for-profit
motivated to.
versus government. I
Yeah,
think
it's just the
probably
nature of a
Just-
private entity versus government. I mean, they want to get business because they're just gonna be, they're competing with each other, all the private EHMs and stuff, so.
I think what the EHM conversation really came down to is that we just got bought out by a capitalistic type system, which,
Yeah.
you know, we see that oftentimes, right? I mean, we have security details that we provide, but then people find out that a private security company will do it for cheaper and faster and be more responsive. I think it's just the common denominator between county and private sector. So that was the EHM conversation. And I know there's been a lot of confusion, but that was what it was explained to me by Chief Davis and Captain Muldrew when they were digging into the conversation.
You said that your booking restrictions changed August 1st, I think.
Correct.
So what are your numbers? Are they indicating more booking? You've had 2 months now. So is it steadily going up or did it jump up and now it's leveled off? Or where are you at compared to before?
So we started on August 1st, we had a jail population of 230 inmates. It sat at about 230 to 240 for the better part of a couple weeks. It jumped up to a high of 280, I wanna say, and now we're back down to about 265, I think. It fluctuates back and forth. I mean, you think about people getting booked into jail on the weekend. So on the weekend, you get a big number of, up to 280. And then on Monday, it drops down to 260 because PRs and, people going through the natural jail court process. So it's sitting right in the upper 280s. Is where we're at.
And your capacity is 4 or something?
It's approximately 400. It's a little under 400, yeah. So, but again, like I talked about when we opened the jail, especially with our staffing issues and things like that, we will not allow it to get that high. We will impose booking restrictions before it comes even anywhere near that number, just
Because of
because.
staffing?
What's that?
Because of staffing?
Because of staffing, correct, yep. So, going back to this, moving on to the next slide, we have a couple policy level proposals. The first is a funding for a contract increase for food services. These have less to do with, hey, we want new stuff, and more to do with, here's the operating costs of feeding the inmates that we are responsible for taking care of. So that was a line level of $361,000 for the funding for the contract and increased food costs. For number 2, it's the funding contract increase for inmate training, which was $3,660. Heidi, you can go in a little more detail into that one, because I'm not aware of.
Okay, yeah, so, the board issued an RFP, back in August, I think it was. We currently have a vendor that provides services for like, pre-employment training for inmates that are in jail right now. And so the current contract, allows for the vendor to request an increase, of up to 3%, and they did request that, and this is, treatment sales tax funding, so at least it's not general fund, but, and so that $3,660 is, the 3% increase, and the contract would be a total of almost $126,000. Go ahead.
Why, I'm not gonna not feed people at the jail, so why is this a policy request if the contract went up for food service? Shouldn't this be maintenance level item?
It's an inflationary item.
I think we said because some of the changes within the food contract changed as far as providing food for the actual employee and then also for compared to the actual inmate.
So is the inflation actually built into the contract? Does the contract allow for
So-
X much per year? Or-
So let me back up on we're talking about the food services contract. We entered into a new contract, at the beginning of this year. We went out to RFP, we changed contracted vendors, the amount increased. We were having some challenges with the previous vendor as far as quality and that good stuff. So the rate for our staff, cause we provide, food services for the staff, that's in their CBA, that we provide a meal to the staff, that went up significantly. And the rate for inmate food, also went up, not as significantly.
Right.
The other thing too is our current, amount, covers 248 inmates plus the staff. Opening the jail, we expect the inmate population to increase as well, so that's also factored into this.
So it went up, but you did an RFP and this was the best option that you had in front of you, I
We have a
presume.
new food services vendor.
And have to do this. I think this was a must-do item
This is a,
in our
I-
list.
going back to his, I don't understand why this isn't maintenance, though, just because if an RFP was done and went through the process, like, I mean, it's an item where it falls under like maintenance level, right? It's just to keep kind of the status quo of things.
I'd have to look back and
I
see.
think it was just the discussion between the volume projected with the restrictions on booking and how many people are gonna be at the jail, that conversation, and then also the conversation about the increase in the staff meals. So if it's a must
Which
do.
I remember now you saying that, but what Heidi's saying is that that's a contractual obligation as well,
is.
so.
The
It's
way
not a
this is-
new thing we're adding.
Right, it's not new. This, I guess the only policy decision is, we're at 260, 280 variable. This is assuming 400. So it's the decision of where do you think the population's gonna be? I don't know, none of us can really project that, but,
You know, regardless, I think both of those items are a must-do. I mean,
Let's do, but sheriff said that it's not gonna be 400, so we know that maybe we
yeah, we
funded
might
it,
That's worst
knock it
case
down to-
scenario.
funded at 300 or something.
Yeah, more reasonable number, but as far as like that, you know, the training business, I mean,
Oh, yeah,
that's
that's-
preventing recidivism and
Yeah, that's not.
Small.
That's,
small,
yeah, that's.
yeah.
we can figure that
$3,600
one
bucks.
out. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, I just think that the totality of all of it, including the CBA and all that stuff, and then there was a policy decision change in the jail reopening was why we brought it before the board. It falls under maintenance, it falls under maintenance.
I have a question for Sheriff in terms of vacancies and kind of what is your plan moving forward? Right, is there a plan B in case you do get into the red and kind of what's going to happen at that time?
So for us, the board approved double overtime for our corrections deputies, and to my knowledge, no one has left since that was approved, so thank you. At this point in time, I'm on your agenda next week to discuss background investigation services. And it was too late for us to incorporate this into the budget. And just to clarify, this has been my biggest mistake as the sheriff so far. When I took over in office, I had one part-time background investigator for an agency of 260 FTEs, and I knew that wasn't enough. So we've slowly ramped up the amount of background investigators. Now, I'm slotted, the funding allows for 2 part-time extra help background investigators. We currently have 5, and we're basically just banking on the vacancy savings at the jail to pay for that in the future. What I've come to realize now, we've kind of let everything settle down because we have to get the background investigators trained and learn how to use all the different stuff. They're all former police officers, so the big thing was just teaching them how to use the software and how to do the process. What we've recognized now is that 5 is not enough. Especially 5 is what we would need to maintain probably the normal turnover at an agency that has, maybe 5 vacancies in each bureau. In the patrol division, I'm gonna have 13 here soon, cause 2 deputies just advised they're applying with Lacey, and there's no reason they won't get hired. And in the jail, I think I have 31 after the most recent termination. So between those 2, I need 44 between just corrections and patrol, and the 5 part-time background investigators. One of the issues with the structuring of how we do backgrounds is that the funding is for extra help. Well, in order for extra help funding to go through for the retired officers and deputies who are coming through, they can't work more than, 600?
693.
693 hours a year. So instead of having a group of 5 who are just hammering out as many backgrounds as they can, they're trying to space out their work so that I don't come into October with no background services. So that's you can kind of see some of the challenges with trying to pump through 43 backgrounds in the next month. It's not really something that we've ever been set up to do. So one of the big conversations that I'm gonna be bringing to the board next week is going to be, we are gonna have to find independent third-party background investigator businesses to help us burn through this. And I think that's the best way to do it. I don't wanna go ask for 5 FTEs of background investigators, cause there may be a day where we don't need 5 background investigators to keep us going at the full-time rate. But right now, to dig us out of a hole, the only way we're gonna get there is to expand the amount of phase 1 backgrounds that we have. Because that process by industry standard is 2 months, just for the phase 1 background process. That doesn't include a chief interview. It doesn't include a polygraph test. It doesn't include a psychological evaluation, and it doesn't include the medical drug test. That's just the phase 1 where we learn about the employee. And so the issue that we're having on top of this is I would say out of every 10 to 15 applicants that we review, 1 makes it through the background by the time we're done. I mean, this is not a profession where we just let anyone in. We have to be picky for a reason. And so the issue that we're having is that our 5 part-time background investigators, we're getting, maybe 1 or 2 applicants across the desk every month. And so we're maintaining the level that we're losing, except in the jail, not quite in the jail. But like I told you earlier, we've hired 8 deputy sheriffs, we've lost 8 deputy sheriffs. And same thing in the jail, we've hired 6, we lost 19. And so, it's just where we're at currently is probably enough to keep us going. It is not enough to dig us out of this hole. So when we talk about the vacancies, I told you earlier that we've suspended options, which is our work release program. We've suspended EHM. We've implemented double overtime. Those have bought us some time. What we need now is the background services to pump through these phase 1 backgrounds, because the rest of the background is pretty quick. Once I get a phase 1 background done, we can do a chief interview, a poly, a psych, and a med exam, usually in 1 or 2 weeks max. But that first phase 1 is where everything bogs down. And so the plan, of course, I do not want to give up those vacant corrections positions. Everyone here, I think, was part of the initial evaluation on the surveys and the studies and what the jail needed. And I don't want to give up work release options and all those things that are designed to get people back into the community and not stuck inside of our jail, unemployed and ready to engage in recidivism. But we've got to get the staffing back up, and that falls on me.
Is that something, so that's like a budget amendment request because you need that authorization now? That's why it's not part of what you're talking about for next year.
Yeah, and so, I've done an AIS, it's for the 17th, that's next when I could get it on the schedule, but, that contract, if we do a contract and we implement it right now, we can absorb it for this year.
Okay.
Going forward, probably not, so we would
Hopefully
have-
we'll get some, it'll be less because you'll get a lot of your positions filled.
Exactly, yep,
That's kind
So how much more?
So the contract is it's a rate on average, per candidate. So on average, it's about $2,500 a person.
Pass or fail.
Pass or fail, and that fee is gonna hit you whether the person passes or fails. And they can.
1 out of 15 passes.
Right, it's not cheap, so my understanding is the company that we're looking towards is they can only do 4 a month. So that's $10,000 for 4 applicants, and like the sheriff said, 10 to 15 to get 1.
So what's gonna end up likely, I mean, when I'm looking at this holistically from the top down, I think we're gonna end up in a position where we have to do multiple contracts with multiple companies if we
Yeah,
can
that
find it.
seems like
If
other,
one can only do 4, well, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for closer to 15 to 20 a month.
you've got other competitors out
We're
there
looking
that
for them. Yeah. Yep, we're looking for them. And the most frustrating thing for me is that our recruiters are doing a really good job. They're filling up the lists with people who are interested in applying. We have people who applied in February that we've not gotten to yet. Because the lists are big and the background capacity is very small. And so by the time we're getting to them, they're like, oh, I took a job with Pierce County 6 months ago, but I was interested. And so that's where I'm extremely frustrated right now. We had a person apply in January, they just got hired. I can't believe they're still around, but I'm thankful, right? So they just got hired on October 16th, it's gonna be their first day. So you can see the disconnect between recruiting efforts, really good, people were wanting to work here, background capacity, really bad. Again, that's.
So talk about you can use vacancy savings this year, but not next year. Why not?
It depends on how we go as far as filling positions. I mean, if we've got positions filled, we're not gonna have those vacancy savings. So,
But you also won't be needing to do as many checks.
right, yeah. So.
I would suspect in theory that looking at the vacancy savings we're staring down at, there will probably be money left over. I can't fill these positions fast enough. I think that there's a way to cover it. The only thing is that we may be coming back to you guys for a budget amendment if we find 2 or 3 companies and we start filling these quickly.
Cause
Then
we
we
have
may
to
be
sign on the contracts.
correct. We have to sign the contracts, and if we fill the positions, well, now the vacancy money is going away. Because our corrections deputies, the silver lining is we can get them to work immediately. There's no waiting for the academy. We can get them in right away. So.
Well, we'll be having more discussions about this next year, but what it sounds like for the request for next year, it seems that for now, how the situation is, it can be absorbed into next year's corrections budget. However, if things turn around and things are looking great and we're getting people in quicker and the background checks are decreasing, but it still kind of goes over, then we can come back for a budget amendment to kind of,
I don't wanna commit to no budget amendment, but more than likely, you know, we could cover it with vacancy savings, but I'm not ready to commit to that. Cause I wanna leave that door open.
I know things change and
yep.
it's, but, okay. So then we'll be having more discussion about this next week. Okay, so let's go back to the sheriff law enforcement, and I do have a question for you as
Okay.
on break, I was looking at one of the funds, and it's Fund 1470. And that is the,
Interlocal drug.
yes. And so,
1470.
yeah, 1470 is this one. And so my question is, in 2026, it goes into the red.
Yep.
And that, for me, is worrisome. And so what is the plan there? Because after that, there's no recovery. I mean, it just goes into the red and then it just goes deeper in.
Well, I know there's a lot of different things going on with the Burn Jag grant, and there's a number of different things at play when it comes to the narcotics task force. Here's my thing, my entire agency is in the red right now. I've been unwilling to this point to remove our narcotics task force deputies because they're the only ones in the entire county enforcing drug crime. None of the cities participate, everyone has backed out for all these different issues. And so when you talk about the opioid crisis that we're experiencing, the only individuals in this entire county who are enforcing dealer level narcotics are the 2 detectives, the 1 sergeant and the 1 lieutenant who are assigned to the task force. And so as we're looking forward to all of this, the funding, I'll let Heidi talk about the funding, because quite frankly, even if it's so complicated, the different ways that those positions are funded, they're piecemeal together to make one team. Some of them are funded through civil asset forfeiture, some of them are through the Burn Jag grant, I think some of them are out of our actual fund, our law enforcement budget. But the bottom line for me is that we can certainly start looking at reducing that, and for all intents and purposes, I need the bodies back on the street, on patrol. But that will not come without a significant cost to the community. Because they are used for 2 primary purposes right now. One, they are the dealer level enforcement of narcotics in this county. They're the only ones. There's no one left after that. You'll be requiring general patrol deputies to go out there and crack down on high level, cartel level narcotics dealers. And I can just tell you that that's not a real thing. Patrol deputies don't have the ability to create all the different infrastructure that our TNT unit has with informants and things like that. The second thing is they act as basically the tip of the spear when it comes to finding and apprehending dangerous felons in our community. I think there's a statistic, out of the last 6 or 7 homicides that have occurred in our county, the task force has captured almost all of them, or led to the capture of almost all of them. And that is because one thing you can't do as a patrol deputy is start building relationships with informants after you need them. You have to have all of that infrastructure in place. Anytime an agency in this area needs a high-profile criminal taken into custody, they contact the narcotics task force so we would be giving up those resources that we currently have established.
I'm not sure if I'm not arguing the need or
Yeah.
you know, the use of it. But we're 2026, we're going in the red, and so I wanna know what's the plan to get us out of the red or the proposal at least.
So the challenge with this fund is it's based on seizures, right? So the deputies go out there and seize property, or money. We have money brought in almost, it's different levels of money. We could be $1,000, it could be, $10,000 that's brought in. That's seized money. That is not forfeited money. So we cannot use that money until it's gone through the courts and been forfeited, or not. So when that money comes into us, it goes into a pending account. I think the last time I looked at that pending account's $300,000. And it is not part of this fund. Let me back up. It is part of the fund, but it is not part of the fund balance. We can't use it, because again, it's still, under the ownership of the person that it was seized from, because it hasn't gone through the adjudication process. So, as an example, a house, and these guys may know more about it on the technical side, was seized some time ago, and we're still waiting for that money to come through because it has been forfeited, I believe. We received a portion of it, so it was $125,000, I think it was, that was received. So projecting the revenue of this is all over the board. You can't look at historicals because each case is an individual situation. It's a unique situation. So I'm doing the best I can to try to project what could be seized and what could be forfeited. So on the revenue side, this is an estimate. I mean, it's a very vague estimate. It's not like sales tax where that is somewhat consistent. You can look at a number of different things.
Wasn't this year?
Yeah. Except it's flat, right? I know that, but that is the challenge of a seizure fund. We had them at the state patrol, we had federal seizures, and we had state seizures, and it was impossible to predict. There are staff that are coded to this. There's one in the prosecutor's office who does the support side. We also have a lieutenant, the Edward Byrne Justice Assistance Grant. If that goes away, then there's a huge impact to this account, because now where do we code that person? There's also a deputy that is coded to this account. That is something that the board authorized a few years ago to add to the narcotics task force. So to do anything, to fix that situation, either the revenue has to increase, and I know the guys are out there, working hard to do their job. But again, if things are not forfeited, and they're just seized and they're sitting in that pending account and not helping the fund balance. If the decisions don't go our way, if you will, and we get that, don't get that revenue, then it doesn't help out the account. Mostly it's staffing that's coded to the account, so we have to change that fund source, and that would be general fund, essentially.
So the choice would be either to bill it to general fund or eliminate a position.
My concern is this, right? It's understanding that there are a lot of variables when it comes to revenue with this fund. But I guess I just don't want to get to 2025 and then there be this huge impact to the general fund that we were not expecting because cases aren't being heard or whatever the situation is. As we know, there's a huge criminal case backlog in Thurston County, right? And so just like looking through this, right, I just don't want to get to 2025 and then be caught in a situation where the board is like, we either have to cut this position or you have to give us, this amount in order for, us to be able to subsidize not only for, because it usually doesn't only end up being a one-time funding, it ends up being a continuous funding in order to get the revenue back or that ending fund balance back to a place where it's.
And I think the sheriff kind of alluded to it earlier that, if the revenue doesn't even come in as we project right here, then that problem could be 2025. sooner, right? And if that's the case, we would either have to come back to the board, and ask for funding for that position or move a position into patrol and out of the task force.
That was why I was kind of starting off with that, is how important it is. But what we would probably end up having to do is just we would remove that body from narcotics task force. But as that, I mean, at 4 for 300,000 people, because it's not just the county, that task force works all throughout the region. We'd be going down to 3 at that point.
Is there some requirement that task force be funded out of this fund? I mean, can't we fund, I mean, if we had the money, couldn't we fund through the general fund, your
Yes,
task force?
absolutely.
Could,
Yeah, this was all done basically to relieve the general fund, I think was the, kind of
Well, I
probably the
get that,
purpose.
but if-
well, this used to be a joint effort between the county and the cities.
So in 2018, October of 2018, we assumed the fiduciary responsibility. That came from the city of Lacey and it came to the county. And so when it came, so did the money. We set up a new account, which was this Fund 1470, the
Yeah,
interlocal drug
and so
enforcement
did
account.
the staffing
Mhm.
came to us.
It was one
And
position.
the assurances when we took it on is that it would not impact the general fund. And here we are.
So therein lies the,
But-
trying to relieve that.
Well, and I'm just playing, I mean, I'm just playing this out, I mean, if the commitments of the other jurisdictions have shifted, but we believe that these are important functions, then, you know, whatever the old arrangement or whatever was is kind of out the window, right? I mean, this is, you know, it may be that we have this need and we're gonna have to go it alone because other jurisdictions have other priorities, or they're gonna rely on us.
They pulled their support, if you will.
Yeah.
In 2018.
Yeah, so I mean, and this was a great way to bridge the gap, but we may not be able to do that. I don't know, I mean, I agree with what Heidi's saying, and not a big fan of seizures of property in some cases anyway. As a lawyer, I represented ones that were really, you know, difficult situations, you know, my clients were renting home to somebody trying to help somebody in recovery, but because they had knowledge, you know, of, you know, they're gonna lose their home, and I don't know, I get nervous about, you know, I would like to see this important functionality have a more stable funding source.
I would also kind of agree with you that I don't think I mean, in law enforcement, we don't do anything for profit. And civil asset forfeiture kind of gets you into a mode of like, if I'm not out seizing stuff, I don't have a job in this task force. I would also like to see a more stable function, but I also don't want to continue to overburden the general fund. Kind of caught in between the two, you
Yeah,
know? One of the potential, I mean, we could also start looking at how JNet operates down in Centralia. They do not operate off civil asset forfeiture. They're actually partnered with the DEA. Different type of task force though. So there's different options that we can look at, but I think that's beyond the scope of this conversation.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, for me, I would wanna continue conversations on this fund and kind of the best direction forward, because it does seem kind of volatile to me.
Yeah.
And in terms of, we are dependent on so many outside factors outside of
Our control.
our control, and I also don't wanna put future boards in a situation where, you know, sheriff's coming back and they're in the red, and it's gonna put another board in a situation where they're like, well, general fund might be tight then too, right? Or they might have that funding where they can
100%.
just be like, yes, this is something, or they might be in a situation where they're not gonna be able to do it, and it's gonna be, so I would rather kind of start having those conversations now, start having a plan for it, even if it's a phased out plan approach.
We will, I'll get to work on that, cause I'd like to explore some other options as well, cause not all the task forces are funded the same. We do ours on one way, JNet operates completely differently, so it's something to look into,
Yeah.
We've relied heavy on the burn jag grant for years and years.
which is
and
going away.
It's going away, and
going
it's
away.
been reduced over the years and just keeps going, and it's to the point where it's become so restrictive that we're just not gonna get anything out of it.
We're not getting much out of it.
Okay,
How much time do I have?
11:41, sorry.
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
4 minutes, not a problem. I just had a couple last things I wanted to say. First, there are 3 new civil service positions in my budget request. There's the evidence technician, that's a brand new position that was approved by the civil service commissioners. There is the cadet position approved by the civil service commissioners, and the animal protection deputy was approved by the civil service commissioners. My request is that I understand that things are tight and that the Board of County Commissioners may not fund these positions. My request is, however, that you do consider at least approving the new classification. A ton of work went into creating these and collaborating with the unions and doing all this extra stuff. I would hope that even though we're presenting in kind of a 2-in-1 here, because you would be approving not just the funding for the position, but the classification, that even if the funding is not approved, that you consider approving the classification, so that in the future, if we need to convert a position or money does free up or anything like that, we don't have to start from scratch. A lot of work went into getting the union's collaboration on the position of these, because we had to come in and say, okay, deputy cadet is taking away duties from the union. Which duties are you okay with? Which duties are, do you not want? And so we had to do a ton of work. So I would just ask that if you choose not to fund them, that you still approve the position so that we don't have to start this process over in the future, because these positions aren't something I'm giving up on. These are positions that I really one day want the sheriff's office to explore. So that was the first thing. The next one is for policy level proposals, overtime. And this is gonna go way longer than 3 minutes, so I will just cover it as a brief. We have this, we can get you all the information for Thurston County Sheriff's Office, but in 2023, the average overtime bill per month is $64,000 approximately, and I believe our funding is at like $26,000 a month. We aren't even close. And I guess one of my concerns with this is that we come back to a fundamental problem every single year, is that I understand why the county doesn't wanna fund additional overtime costs, because then if I don't need it, I'll just go spend it on something else. We're so far away from that at least for the next biennial budget, I am requesting an additional funding overtime for the amount of $370,000, because that is just to cover the bare minimum of what we are trying to do to keep 911 services afloat. And based on how long it takes to get people hired and through the academy, this is gonna be through the next biennial budget. The problem that we have is that when I don't have an appropriate budget for overtime, I kinda understand how this works, right? At the end of the year, I come tell you guys that I'm in the red. I'm in trouble. And then the county, instead of funding that, just can pay the bill essentially, right? I mean, you guys can cover me if I go over. Thank you, I appreciate it. What we end up having to do this year is slash all of our training. We had to slash all these different areas that led to a tired, overworked, and untrained police department, which I don't think anyone wants. And that has been actually the #1 complaint from my deputies. It's not the amount of overtime they work. It's not that they can't get days off. It's for another year, I can't go to any training that's outside of the mandatory state minimum training. And so my request moving forward is that if I have a budget to actually work with overtime, I can pay an employee to work while I send another employee off to child interviewing, right? We have a lot of employees that wanna know how to interview children better. Can't send them off to that. General interrogation class about how to interview people, can't send them off to that. There are a whole bunch of trainings that we just said, no, don't even check the box this year, don't even put in for anything, because it's getting denied, there's no funding, we're slashing our really important training like SWAT and dive just to make the bare minimum. So I understand it's kind of an issue, maybe at the general county level, but without the funding for the overtime that we're paying for patrol, that I can guarantee is gonna go into the next biennial budget with how long it takes, we're gonna continue to slash training to meet this demand. And it creates a huge problem, and it creates a lot of animosity amongst the deputies, because we can't send them off to training. And then I will yield my time for the rest of this stuff, because I'm out of time. But the other things in there, I'm sure, as you guys are deliberating, can be pretty easily explained. The additional cost for the academy and the funding to purchase defibrillators for the rest of our agency.
Is there any issue, Robin, with the first thing he mentioned about the approving the new classifications that have been worked out? Even though we're not gonna think, if we decided not to fund,
To establish the classifications, you can do that completely separate from the budget.
that's,
You wouldn't be approving positions But we would have the classification,
Yeah. I just-
should
no
you
reason
ever
to
wanna
vote
use
on
it in the future.
You guys are the last step. And a very, very long process to get these
Yeah,
classifications.
there's no issue with that.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Okay, 11:46, thank you, Sheriff, for coming here, and you're adjourned.